Thank you, folks. I intended on starting today by talking about what a privilege it is to be back in the Glenties, and it really is. But actually, sitting there the last 10 minutes, what a privilege it was to see the level of warmth and affection that was emanating from Joe and the people that Joe surrounds himself with. And it was really lovely to be a part of. I suppose I should preface your comments tonight by saying I came down here tonight not to praise Caesar. I was asked to comment on the legacy in 1916 and where we're going from here. And that requires us to be honest, direct, and to challenge ourselves, to not always agree, but to be respectful. And I believe that's where a republic is born. So if I will start my paper. In Yeats' poem, from which this session derives its name, we are told that those who lost their lives in Easter of 1916, that we know their dreams enough to know that they dreamed and now are dead. I would question that narrative strongly, and I believe that isn't the case. The narrative, or indeed what I would argue to be the true terrible beauty of 1916, is the unrelenting focus we place on the valiant nature of our dead alone, but not on the reasons why they were willing to sacrifice their lives. We recently commemorated the centenary of the 1916 Rising. During the past couple of years, there's been numerous debates on how we should celebrate that period in their time. We talked about the role that should be afforded to the relatives. Some laughed and others were incredulous that the Prime Minister of Britain, David Cameron, featured in the national campaign video for that. We were rightfully respectful to afford the respect and to be respectful when we celebrated and thinking of our unionist communities up north who we share this island with. What we never did, we never questioned, we never looked at the proclamation. We never questioned whether we, all of us, were cherishing all of the children of the nation equally. And I felt that was strange. And I felt it was strange considering that in January 2016, CSO figures captured 135,000 children living in Ireland in a state of consistent poverty. That's real children in Ireland. That's children in Ireland today, 135,000 of them, some without access to a warm coat. Others who are living precariously in single-room accommodation with their parents and their families. Others who don't have the basic requirements of 3 straight meals or a proper standard of nourishment through a poverty that neither they nor their parents chose. I believe that it was the terrible beauty born at the foundation of our state is our collective ability to absolve ourselves of blame when presented with the suffering of others. Do we still believe that it was the bravest that fell during that period? Do our maidens still dance at the crossroads? Do we all collectively still need to tighten our belts? Did we really all party? Of course, there was a less obvious beauty, a bravery, in those who survived and attempted to build that republic in the years which followed 1916. But very quickly, the promise of a republic which guaranteed religious and civil liberty, equal rights and opportunities to all its citizens, faded. And the creation which manifested itself in the years that followed was in all essence grotesque. That statement should be qualified, and I will do so. In doing so, I'm not going to qualify by mentioning the depravity of the 1922 Civil War. I'm not even going to comment on the tens of thousands of people who were institutionalised in this country in MacGill and laundries, mother and baby homes of various different institutions. What I will point to is the remarks that were made in 1924 by the then Minister of Industry and Commerce, Patrick McGilligan, who commented that people may have to die in this country and die of starvation. To derive veracity from these remarks, one need only research the death certificates of infants from mother and baby homes where marasmus, or rather starvation, was often cited as the cause of death. In Yeats's closing line in Easter 1916, a terrible beauty is born. It's always reminded me of one of my favourite books, which is actually Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which by coincidence is 200 years old this year. There's many, including myself, we should say, who interpret Mary Shelley's Frankenstein as a feminist critique of the horror that materialises when creation is determined solely by the hand of a male creator. And while it's very tempting to highlight that analogy alone as a comparison to our nation's own unnatural birth, I'm going to very reluctantly refrain from doing so. And I'm going to deploy a single line from that piece which resonates enormously with me and the politics that I have tried to espouse over the past couple of months in response to a vicious spate of murder and violence that occurred in my own constituency of the North Inner City in Dublin recently. That line, which resonates with me and was spoken by Victor Frankenstein in the piece as to a creator as opposed to the monster, was, "Evil henceforth became my good." Over the past couple of months, I found myself in a very unusual position of being a commentator on a violent feud which has claimed 7 lives to date in our capital city. More unusual still in the sense that I have throughout my lifetime, I've known some, not only of the victims, but I've known the perpetrators involved in these crimes. I've attended the same school as a couple of them. Their vivid faces are interspersed with my own memories of childhood. I have nodded as we passed by on the street, and I've shared polite, meaningless words as we progressed on our different paths through life. There is a very self-evident fact concerning the fate of these individuals, which is often forgotten in our rush to afford judgment and blame. And that is not a single one of these individuals who have engaged in such extreme levels of criminality and depravity. Not a single one of them people. They never turned on a computer. They never opened the screen and typed criminal, drug dealer or assassin into a CAO form. I would assert strongly that it was this very lack of choice which made evil become their good. All goodness being lost, drug dealing and violent crime become a means for providing for oneself and family in a society which limits opportunity dependent on the postcode in which a person is born. Rarely discussed, but of equal importance, is the fact that drug taking becomes a means of escapism in a society which limits opportunity depending on the postcode where a person is born. Now, many will rightfully argue that the taking of illegal drugs occurs throughout Irish society, regardless of class or income, and I would of course agree with this assertion. But I would suggest that the type of and the motivation for taking the drugs are completely different. In a more affluent part of the country, you will be unlikely to find the same proliferation of blister packs strewn across the street, which once contained anti-anxiety and sleeping tablets, which vulnerable people are using to self-diagnose their own depressions. In a more affluent part of the country, you will not find a person so willing to put their body through the horror of heroin and misuse, just so they can escape the everyday reality of what is their lives. And yeah, the question that was most asked of me during the period of turmoil that plagued my community recently was, how do we stop the violence? And so often I was almost tempted to respond by asking, why? So the dealers can stop selling death to other people, the dealers can stop shooting each other and going back to selling death to other people in peace. Do you think I'm being facetious with that question? Let me elaborate. In 2013 alone, 679 people lost their lives in our country through what the Health Research Board termed drug-related death. 679 people. And we should, of course we should endeavour to bring justice to the killers of those 7 individuals. But we should also consider ourselves accomplices to the poverty which has killed thousands of young Irish people since heroin and its likes first punctuated into the heart of working class communities in the early 1980s. You know, we raise our head momentarily when the effects of the epidemic spill over into our understanding of more civilised society, but we consistently absolve ourselves of blame by painting the participants as the others and who are not like us in the mainstream. When we do take interest, we place an unrealistic expectation upon our Gardaí to solve a malaise that is engineered by a society of extreme inequalities, such extreme inequalities in regards to health, education, opportunities, extremes of inequalities to a point that there is now a conveyor belt of young men and women in our cities, in our towns, in our rural villages who are willing to inject not only themselves with poison, but also the communities that they live in. We simply cannot continue to allow ourselves to remain unresponsive to the pain felt in our most marginalised communities. And all the while, we still ensure to feign gasps of horror when these same communities respond in a manner that we consider irrational. As a comparison, the recent Brexit vote in the UK can provide further evidence to highlight the dangers that materialises when we collectively choose to ignore the suffering of low-income communities and still patronisingly expect them to respond to our understanding of the national interest. I would hazard a guess that I'm not alone in possessing both a healthy Euroscepticism that is combined with a strong awareness that the advantages of being an equal member of the Union far outweigh the oft-mentioned negatives. As such, it was unsurprising, but still no less disheartening to witness that it was from the predominantly semi-skilled and low-skilled demographics in Britain where the greatest percentages of those who voted to leave came from. Of course, voting to leave will achieve nothing in addressing the problems which have blighted the lives of working class communities in former industrial heartlands of Sheffield and Swansea and Sunderland. Wages which has plummeted in the UK will not be restored by the false profits of Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage, whose name I even... Working conditions for these low-skilled groups will not be improved by these elites who have proven time and time again that their main priority is to maximise profits for their wealthy friends. The NHS, so often a beacon of what it meant to be proud and British, will continue to be decimated. English schools will continue to churn out young, disillusioned people who will never avail of the life of chances that were afforded to the Etonians who led the cheers for Brexit, safe in the knowledge that they will be safeguarded from the economic repercussions that are inevitable when a country leaves a common trade bloc of some 500 million people. While Farage and Johnson led a false working class revolt that comes with the promise of uncertainty, it was the educated groups, the more what we consider to be rational thinking masses, who offered the most marginalised groups a more crueler choice still. They asked them to remain as they are. They sanctimoniously mocked that it would be ignorant, or rather racist, to do otherwise. Racist, the absolute arrogance it must take to accuse the English working class of inherent racism, when it was these very same people who have the proudest traditions of standing against fascism. It's simply staggering. I do not accept that it was racism that prompted the most hardest hit by years of austerity to vote to leave the European Union, but rather it was the molecule of power that they had finally given the neoliberal, educated, cosmopolitan classes a kick up the backside for years of neglect and indifference to their plight. The terrible beauty about Brexit and the recent wave of violence unleashed upon my streets of Dublin's inner city is that once more it permits us to discuss the wickedness of the act without ever analysing its meaning. To deploy a more potent line from Yeats's East in 1916, too long a sacrifice can make a stone of the heart, or when will it suffice? It is in this line that I believe Yeats shows the true potential for a more virtuous legacy, which can be achieved from the memory of 1916, if only we can allow compassion to replace the vengeful indifference that comes from being a society born out of such extremes of violence. The challenge facing us today, us, and I'm talking us here, as we move past the 100-year mark from the watershed of 1916, is to see ourselves not only as the guardians of the legacy of those who were killed on that occasion, but rather to become implementers of their ideals. Can we fulfil the promise of a republic which is in many ways yet to be claimed? If we are to do so, then there must exist collective goals which each of us as a citizen of this republic can agree upon, regardless of the political ideology that we conform to. The promise to cherish all of the children of the nation equally, for example, that seems like a very agreeable position to begin at. The promise to never again should we smugly campaign upon a slogan of keeping the recovery going while 135,000 children sleep so precariously at night in various conditions of poverty. We, me and myself, as a politician, must be prepared to be bold in this pursuit. We must be prepared to fail once more. We must be prepared to fail and return once more to fail better, but always keep the aspiration to erode that figure of 135,000 children living in poverty as the only measurement of our success as legislators. To that end, there are 1,600 children living in direct provision centres throughout the state, close to 5,000 people in total. Let me be clear about this. Our history and the crimes for which we as a society have been guilty of throughout the past century, and yes, I am referring to religious laundries, to the mother and baby homes, they mean that we have no right to continue to institutionalise human beings based on our interpretation of whether they may be suitable for free movement within our wider community. I am ashamed that as I speak to you now, that each of us are living through what we may one day be apologising for. The United Nations, international human rights groups have already criticised our system of direct provision. The State's Special Rapporteur on Child Protection, Dr. Jeffrey Shannon, has lamented that children in these centres are living in state-sanctioned poverty and in environments that could prove highly damaging. An asylum seeker in a direct provision centre is up to 5 times more likely to suffer from depression and mental health related problems, and that's according to a study carried out by the Royal College of Surgeons. This is happening in Ireland today, and our republic will not emerge while we continue to incarcerate people for the crime of not being like us in appearance, for the crime of not being of our culture, for the crime of the location of their birth. The next point I'm going to make is going to be, it can be divisive, but it's one that we shouldn't share as citizens in this state, and it's one that's going to become more relevant over coming years. The issue of abortion is one that resonates so strongly with me because I'm an elected rep from a working class area that is home to many migrant and low income communities which are most impacted by this restriction. Despite the prohibitive nature of the 8th Amendment to our Constitution, over 5,000 women each year export to a country not of their birth for a standard medical procedure that is too often debated only in its most extreme form. It reeks of a society insecure in their position as a modern republic, that we continue to deny reproductive rights to our citizens, safe in the knowledge that it's our proximity to our former coloniser, which means that we can once more maintain our default position of idleness, while casting judgment upon those who decide to act in what they consider to be the best interest of their own bodies. The true hypocrisy of the amendment is that it has done nothing to curtail the existence of abortion in this country, but rather once again presented us with an Irish solution to an Irish problem, and so the terrible beauty of simplistic narrative and belief continues. The lies that we continue to tell ourselves so as to deceive what we choose not to believe. That Irish women are forced to travel in their droves to maintain the pretence that we don't have abortions here. A pretence that the UN has damned as tantamount to torture. The terrible beauty of 1916 is not, of course, the drugs crisis, direct provision, or even the denial of reproductive rights to our citizens. It is those lies that we choose to tell ourselves in order that we may shirk the responsibilities that have laid before us these past 100 years. The hope remains that ours is a republic as yet unachieved, and as such, the legacy is the gauntlet that has been laid down to us as future generations to achieve that republic of equals as it was promised at the foundation of our state. To do so, it will require courage. It will require the willingness not only to evolve the narrative of our own creation, but a willingness to evolve our sense of meaning and purpose within our republic. It will require us to change utterly. Thank you.